We're going to the Rising Stars Rapid Tournament. It's a 4-round Swiss. I'm excited. I want to get some wins today. I want to get up back over 1500 for my over the board rating. Let's see what we can do.
We shook hands and my opponent started with the move e4. So I decided to go straight into a Caro-Kann. We wrote our moves down and she quickly played the move d4. I almost always respond with the move d5 after I play c6 on move 1, and she opted for the exchange Caro-Kann. So I retook the pawn. The game can now go a few different ways, but she actually brought her bishop out to d3, which meant that I couldn't develop my bishop to f5, which is a square that sometimes you want to put it on. So I just simply went knight c6. If they don't develop the bishop early, you can play it to f5. You can also play it to g4 if the knight comes to c3. But both of those options weren't available to me here. She's gone c3, and now I have to decide where do I want to put my light squared bishop. So in this position, I do what I normally do online, and I play the move g6, which prepares a square for me to put my bishop to. So my bishop is going to come to f5, and that pawn is going to support it. Her bishop came out to f4. This is a logical move, but she's not developing her knights yet. I was hoping for knight f3 so I could just put my bishop on a more desirable square, which would be to put it on g4 and maybe trade off the bishop for the knight. But my bishop comes out to f5, so I was totally fine with this, and I was expecting an exchange of pieces here. My opponent decided to trade the bishops on f5, and I don't know if that was a good decision for her, but if she hadn't, I would have traded myself. Getting rid of the light squared bishop in the Caro-Kann is often something you just want to do. You want to trade it off. And now I was trying to decide, where do I want to put my dark squared bishop? Do we put it on d6? If we do, we have to play e6. She developed her knight to f3. And so now I was really considering playing e6, develop my dark squared bishop, get my knight onto f6 most likely, and put my rook onto the g file. This kind of Caro-Kann is one where you don't really need to think about castling. You can often just keep your king in the middle. You got a cluster of pawns in the middle. So I did play the move e6. Here my opponent short castled, most probably logical move in the position. And now I was trying to decide, where do I want to put my dark squared bishop? Do I put it on d6 and trade off the dark squared bishops? Or do I put it on g7 and keep my bishop for later use? I decided eventually on g7, and I thought I don't need to trade everything off in this position. I was curious if my king was going to castle this game. I thought my dark squared bishop might be able to just sort of support my king if I did decide to short castle. And here my opponent moved their rook to e1. I had a lot of things to consider now. I didn't know where I should put my knight. Should I put it on f6? Should I put it on e7? I did decide on e7 because I thought if I put it on f6, it's kind of blocking where the bishop can go. It didn't feel as safe. I thought e7, it's close to the queen. It's kind of tucked in there. And it's sort of just defending everything. It's also defending my knight on c6. It just seemed like a more solid move than anywhere else. Ultimately, I think that e7 looked better because I thought I could bring my knight to g6 and tempo my opponent's bishop. However, my opponent's next move kind of took me by surprise and caused me a lot of thinking. Queen b3 just is annoying because it's hitting b7. So I don't want to just give up the pawn for free. I also wanted to play knight g6 and tempo my opponent's bishop. So could I tempo first and then defend the pawn? Or should I defend the pawn first and then tempo the bishop? Didn't know what order was best. I eventually decided on queen d7. It looked like a good square to defend the pawn, but still hold control on the e6 pawn. My opponent moved her knight to e5. A really good move because it tempos my queen, and I don't want to move my queen to any other square, really. I mean, maybe c8 just to keep defending the b7 pawn, but knight e5 makes me think, should I take with my own knight on c6? She took a little bit of time here trying to decide how she wanted to recapture, and I was honestly really surprised when she captured with the d pawn. Not that her now e pawn is isolated. It is technically on the right side of the board with the 3 pawns, or on the left side of the board with the current 3 pawns. But it just seemed like it was very forwards, and it wasn't going to be super easy for her to protect that pawn with another pawn, especially since her bishop was sitting on f4. I thought this is a weakness, and I need to try to pursue some way of getting an advantage here. I spent a little bit of time trying to think, is there some way that I can attack that pawn immediately? I could move my queen now to c7 because the bishop's not eyeing c7 anymore. But I saw that the rook on e1 was actually also defending the pawn. So she has 2 defenders. I just decided to castle. It was this moment in the game that I decided to get up and get a drink of water, because you need to stay hydrated when you're at the chessboard. I soon came back with that cup of water, sat down and began assessing the position. I was really thinking about king h8 and putting my rook onto the g file. Here she moved her bishop to g5. And this was an interesting move. I didn't quite understand it. I thought, what is the point in this? She's not defending the pawn on e5 as much anymore, so maybe now I could go queen c7. I really thought about this. I thought it looked like a good time to do that. However, I started considering the move f6. And f6, pawn takes, bishop takes, bishop takes. And so she would win a minor piece there. I didn't think that that looked any good. I also thought maybe it's just best to attack the pawn since it's only defended once. So I thought maybe putting my knight on g6 seemed simplest. That's ultimately what I went for. On my opponent's next move, it was obvious why she played her bishop to g5. She wanted to play it up to f6, and this is a way for her to defend her pawn. And so now if I take the bishop, she could take back with the pawn, and her pawn is even more forwards. And I think that it's a much easier target. So I really thought I should just capture this and force her pawn to come to f6, because then I can just drop my queen back and take it. I would lose the b7 pawn then, but there's probably a way to simply grab this pawn. I also didn't think it was a good decision by her, because now this gives me a passed pawn in the center of the board. Not a passed pawn, but a pawn that doesn't have another pawn in front of it. My other pawns are beside me, sort of protecting, but there's still her f pawn that on f2, not f6. Her f2 pawn could still take my e pawn, but this seemed like a good thing for me. So what I first decided to do was play b6. So now my queen is not tied down to holding b7, and then I can move my queen somewhere like d8 and then take that pawn back. I really thought this is not going to be easy for her to protect it. However, even though that was something where I could get an edge and get ahead, I thought maybe there's more active ways of playing and not being materialistic. Maybe developing is better. So I really thought about just trying to move my king over, move my rook over, or even position my knight into a stronger square, because right now it's not doing a whole lot on g6. I think when playing over the board chess, you really need to be thinking on your opponent's time. What are they most likely going to do, and what is your response going to be? And I was not expecting this move c4. I do try to always guess what my opponent's next move is going to be. I thought that they were most likely going to go knight d2 because it gets their knight into the game. But yeah, c4 just seemed really strange. Obviously, she wants to take my pawn. I would recapture with queen. She recaptures with queen. I recapture with pawn. And then I have doubled pawn on the f file that doesn't have a pawn protecting it that she's probably going to grab. So I really didn't want an exchange of pieces here. I thought about myself taking her pawn on c4, attacking her queen, then she takes back. That seemed a lot more favorable than her taking mine, because I wouldn't have just the doubled pawn that didn't have a pawn protecting it at the end of that. So it would be I take c4, she takes c4 with the queen, and then I didn't quite know what I was going for there. So the move that I decided on here was just to advance my pawn, and I think this was a really good move. I'm glad that I took the time to find it. If this was a blitz game, I wouldn't have found that move. But I tried to consider all the options that I had, and I pushed the pawn. One good thing about having my pawn on d4 was that it blocks her knight from developing to a natural square. Knight could normally go to c3. And so in this position, she had to put her knight on the edge of the board, a3. And that's the way she was able to connect her rooks. I was really happy with how this happened, and I could see that her knight was just not on its optimal square, and this was going to be a long-term advantage that I wanted to try to exploit. Basically, if you can get your pawns in a position where the knight's not going to be able to jump to the squares, so like right now, her pawn's on c4, and she can't jump to that square with her knight. So the only other square that she can jump to is b5. Well, I guess she could come back to c2, but it just seems like it's a very slow way to develop. So I was trying to decide between the move e5 or queen c6, and e5 looked really strong. My knight's holding the pawn, but queen c6 also seemed like a decent decision, putting my queen on a slightly more active square and letting myself develop with rook c8. Either rook could come to c8, and we could just pile up some pressure on this c4 pawn as well. Another thing that I liked about this move was I'm going to be able to play e5 very soon, and that will allow my queen to hit the pawn on f6. She moved her knight in, attacking my pawn, so I just decided to move my pawn up, hold my center. I've got 3 pawns that are very strong together right now, and I'm also ready to take on f6. I decided to take a sip of water because my opponent took probably the longest thought of the game so far. She spent several minutes looking for this move, queen g3. She played it, and this is really a very clever move. She's pinning my knight to my king. So my knight is not protecting the pawn on e5. I saw this and thought, well, now I need to defend the pawn on e5. And I wasn't entirely sure what the best way to do that was. So I have a few ways of defending this pawn on e5. And one of them is moving my queen to d6. The knight's attacking d6. So immediately I was like, well, that's not an option. Then I thought about putting the queen on e6. And I could see that, well, then the knight on b5 can just take my pawn on d4 because my pawn is pinned. The rook will be hitting my queen. So that wasn't an option. And for some stupid reason, I didn't consider queen takes f6. This is obviously the move. Now, you might be saying, hey, Owen, if you put your queen on f6 and they take the pawn with the rook, then can you take the rook back? You can't take the rook back because your knight's not going to be defending e5 and their queen could take your queen. Well, if their queen takes my queen, then my knight becomes unpinned. And so I knew it was okay to defend with my queen like that, but I didn't defend in the most optimal way, in my opinion. I haven't seen the analysis. I started to see the rook on a8 is the one that I really would like to defend with. And so to prepare my rook on the a file coming to the defense, I needed to make sure I protected that a pawn. And so in this position, I played the move a6, tempoing her knight away. and that also allows my rook to come to the e file. As expected, she pulls her knight back to a3. Not a very active knight, so I was happy with that. And now I thought, let's just put the rook over to e8. It is weird to see a move like right now afterwards, like queen takes f6, and I just don't know why I missed it. Like it's obviously the move. That pawn on f6 really becomes a big issue for me pretty soon here. And if I had just taken it off, defended with my queen, everything would have been totally fine. Here, my opponent is looking at a way to continue her attack. And that knight on g6 is still not able to move. And so if a piece is not able to move, you always attack the pinned piece. So she pushes h4 here, and I quickly go king h8, not thinking about what she still has. That knight still cannot move. And the reason for that is because her queen is still threatening to move into g7. And now I realized that I was about to lose a knight. She plays her pawn to h5, and I started to feel the pressure. All of this could have been avoided if I had just taken that pawn on f6. And I now realized that. I was in the depths of despair here. I was depressed. I was unhappy. I didn't know what to do about this, but I knew that I was going to be losing. Don't feel sorry for yourself, Owen. Take that pawn on f6 off. Finally, I captured the pawn and was annoyed, frustrated, but is what it is. You gotta just keep fighting in chess. She took my knight on g6, and so here I thought, why don't we just recapture? But again, I didn't. I thought it would be clever to pin the pawn to the queen and then recapture with my rook. I thought I need to still keep activity on this g file. I haven't checked the analysis again, but I think it's just better here just to take the pawn back, because here what she can do is capture my f7 pawn, threaten to win a rook, and take with check if I had captured her queen. So basically, pawn captures f7, my rook captures her queen, she takes my other rook on e8 with check, and she gets her queen back. So this is not the way. I was not feeling good after I saw her next move. She takes on f7. And now I was in the think tank. I could see, oh man, what am I doing? Thankfully, I do have a move here, and I played that move, and I believe it's the only move in the position that probably I can play, and that is queen takes f7. But I didn't see it initially, and I was really not in the right headspace here. Wasn't playing optimal moves. I thought, what have I done? Finally, I saw the move queen takes f7, and I took the pawn back. Now we're in for a game. I think my position is still pretty decent. My rook's going to be pretty active on the g file, and I have 3 pawns in the center of the board that are going to be very strong. That's my win condition. Push those pawns. My opponent's queen's hit, so she puts her queen on h2, a very inactive square. I do think queen h3 might have been better here, but I push on with the move d3. My pawn is a passed pawn, and it needs to be stopped. It's 2 squares from promoting. I am very soon going to be playing e4, protecting d3, and these pawns are going to just be the biggest headache for my opponent. I actually thought in this position, I'm probably still winning. I don't know. I might not be, but her knight on a3 is just not a good piece. I've now stopped her knight jumping to c2 as well. So she brings her rook over from a1, puts it on d1, and I promptly play e4. So these pawns are really my win condition. I'm excited. I was feeling a lot more confident even after missing queen takes f6 for several moves. I was pretty taken back when she played b3 here. I thought that that was just not the move at all. Didn't seem to be the best decision. I could see maybe it's because her pawn on c4 was only defended by her knight, and she wants to put her knight maybe on b1 to try and reroute it around. But I think at this point, she's already up the minor piece, so giving a few pawns for activity is probably not a bad thing. She could probably have just played knight b1 immediately, or something that just gives her activity. Don't know what that is, but maybe knight b1. But yeah, b3 didn't seem to be the move. I now thought I have to push these pawns more. My pawn on e4 is protected, and so I'm not too worried about it. So I can maybe play f4 here. I also thought about moving my rook. f4 might be premature. So I thought maybe let's try to activate our pieces, double the rooks up so that they're both super active, eyeing this king. I initially thought about going rook g6, but that let her queen come to h5, pinning my rook to my queen. So I put my rook on g5, just getting ready to double my rooks. And doubled rooks on the g file against the king looks beautiful. I also had the threat of, if the king goes to h1, then I could play rook h5 because my queen's defending h5, pinning the queen to the king. So I would be able to win her queen there. Everything was looking very positive. Her rooks were super inactive because of my pawn center. Her knight wasn't even in the game. And both of my rooks are going to be crashing through pretty soon. She definitely didn't want to make it easy for me, and so she played her rook up to e3. Here I was trying to decide what squares is she trying to move to. It looked like maybe she could come to g3, but then I could just capture her rook, then her queen takes, then my rook tempos. No, that didn't look good. So then I thought if she comes to g3, maybe I just play my other rook to g8 and then take her rook. And if the f pawn ever, takes me, then I have two pawns that are connected and both passed. So I would be feeling a lot more confident. So then I thought maybe she could go to h3. So I'm probably not going to be wanting to play rook to g8, my e rook to g8, because that almost looks like a checkmate. Yes, my queen's holding h7, but if it wasn't, then the rook capture h7 would be a checkmate because the rook on g8 would be blocking the king's retreat. So this was going through my mind. And then I found the beautiful move, f4. f4 is a beautiful move because it kind of forces her to move her rook somewhere. It's got to probably come to h3. That's the only square on the rank that it can go to. If it goes back to e1, then it's just two moves wasted for her, and I've gotten basically two moves for free. So this looked really nice. I thought, let's go to f4. Her rook's coming to h3. Then I'm going to play e3. The pawn can't be taken by her rook because it's defended by my f-pawn. And so maybe she takes with her f-pawn, then I take with my f-pawn. And so we're going to have two pawns on e3 and d3. They're both passed pawns. No other pawn can hit them. And one of them's going to push. Yes, she could take the pawn on d3 for free, but then I could go pawn to e2. And how's she going to stop that? I didn't see a way for her to stop that. e1 was coming, my rook's defending, and everything looks fantastic. I push my pawn to f4. She moves her rook to h3 as predicted, and I immediately played pawn to e3. I was feeling confident here. I knew she was going to have a think, and so I started doing the thing that all great chess players do when they are about to win a game. Started twiddling my bishop. Thing about twiddling a bishop is it just gives you this like superiority complex. You just feel powerful, It's sort of like when a lion out in the wilderness stands up and stretches, Everybody knows that he's the real deal. He's the man with the plan. So my twiddling was my way of doing that. Don't think anybody actually noticed my twiddling, but yeah, I was feeling it. My opponent took my pawn on e3 as expected, and I recaptured with the f-pawn. 2 connected passers. They are going to do some serious work now. She moves her rook over to f1, tempoing my queen. And all I really have to do here is slide my queen somewhere and then continue pushing the pawns. However, what's better than sliding my queen somewhere when you have a beautiful queen sacrifice? The crowd went absolutely wild. The king is forced to take. She's got no other moves. And then I can push my pawn with a tempo. She's going to have to hide her king on e1. Then I can push d2. She's going to be checked. She's going to have to either take my pawn on d2 or move to f2. And I thought she'd probably take on d2. Then I promote my queen on e1 with check. Everything is just calculated and forcing, and this just looked beautiful. She moves her king to e1, and I go in with the check on d2. She takes my pawn on d2, and I promote my pawn on e1 with check. The twiddling continues. She moves her king over to c2. Here I knew there must be a checkmate, and I fairly promptly found it. Rook to e2. The king can only go to d3, and queen d2 was checkmate. I was trying to calculate it a few times and eventually played the move. I hope you enjoyed the recap of this round. More recaps will be coming soon. If you can, please do like and share the video. Thanks so much. Bye for now.